Muraviev. He's an associate professor of national security and strategic studies at Curtin University. He joins us from Perth in Australia, so it's a pleasure having you. Thank you for your time. Firstly, there's a lot happening, as you can tell, in eastern Ukraine. What is your general assessment of how things stand right now?
Look, the Russians continue to hold the strategic initiative. They continue with the advance, albeit at pretty slow pace, given the level of the Ukrainian resistance, as well as the complexities of the terrain. But for now, the Ukrainian forces cannot come up with any form of effective counter-resolution, even despite accelerating Western military aid. The problem for the Ukrainian is that the bulk of their professional armed forces have been destroyed over the past 3 or 4 months due to incredibly heavy fighting, and the Ukrainians right now are throwing into battle reservists, fully trained personnel, many of which actually complain about lack of equipment, lack of coordination, command and control, and basically the Ukrainians lack heavy equipment. They lack artillery, they lack main battle tanks, they practically have no air defense and no air support. And the Russians simply overwhelm them with sheer firepower, with an intensive bombardment, which effectively is designed for one single purpose: to take as many Ukrainians out as possible. And only after that, they began their slow progress and territorial grab. So for now, the situation hasn't really improved in Ukrainian favor. In fact, as the report has suggested, including in the words of President Volodymyr Zelensky, fighting accelerates around Ukrainian second largest city, Kharkiv, and obviously the Russians continue to bombard strategic targets along the Black Sea coast.
But how is that possible? People keep asking. We see on the news not just solidarity, but weapons entering Ukraine from the West, from NATO, particularly from the US. How is Ukraine still so outgunned and seemingly losing?
Look, I think there was a lot of hype and there was a lot of over-expectation that Russia has proven to be a false major military power. We need to remember that Russia entered this conflict as world #2 military power. Even though it came across massive stumbling blocks at the start, and obviously the level of Ukrainian resistance came as a complete shock to its system, the Russian military managed to regain its capacity. I think we severely underestimated the production and the level of resourcefulness of the Russian defense industry, because they keep replicating high-precision weapons, munitions, missiles that the Russians use not at the lower pace, but at the more accelerating pace than at the start of the campaign. Secondly, we need to remember that the Ukrainian military, whilst being mobilized and technically has now more fighting troops on the battle line than the Russians. That's another interesting twist that we need to remember. Have been taken systematic losses at the hands of the Russians, which were targeting their main battle tanks, armored vehicles, air defense systems, combat aircraft, the list goes on. And what the West is giving Ukraine is not as impressive as people may assume, because they've been hearing this, massive figures of $800 million here, $1.5 billion here. But the reality is a lot of supplies that came to Ukraine over the past few months are either former Soviet surplus, which were in possession of the former members of the Warsaw Pact, and many of this equipment is either outdated or some of it actually proved to be inoperable. Secondly, the level of supply of Western advanced military systems like tactical missiles, armed personnel carriers is pitiful. What Ukraine get in a month, Russia destroys in a week, if not in a matter of days. So by and large, if we cut the balance, Ukraine ends up with very little, and what it receives gets targeted by the Russians in the first days of its arrival.
Wow, what Ukraine receives in a month, Russia destroys in a week. Appreciate the perspective. That's Alexey Muraviev at Curtin University. Thank you.